Okay, so we're here with Marvin Rees, one of the mayor candidates for Bristol. And just to ask, I know it's a big question, but if you could just simplify what you think are the most important things that you will do as part of your manifesto if you were to get elected as mayor.
Well, with our plan for the city, we didn't just want to come up with a shopping list of issues. What we're saying is actually we have a proper worldview. We have a view of what makes a place work and the foundations you need to put in place to make a place successful. So all the shopping, you know, the key issues around housing, transport, schooling, green technology, how we get our economy going. These are all critical, and the candidates will be talking about these. But it's the perspective you bring to it that's also important. We're saying there are three things you need to make a place successful, three areas. Mm-hmm. Firstly, you need a proper vision and a plan. Not just over 1-2 years, but actually over 30, 40, 50-year plan. Where's the city going to be? What's the shape of the global economy going to be? What's the world going to be like? Where do we want our city, Bristol, to be within that global economy? And how do we get ourselves ready to occupy that place so that we're not finding ourselves a parish council in 10, 15 years' time with obsolete industries and, you know, people leaving the city because there's no opportunity here. It's really thinking ahead in a very intentional way. Vision and a plan to deliver that vision. The second is we believe you need to tackle inequality and poverty. Mm-hmm. We do not believe you can build strong societies across great gaps of wealth and power, poverty and powerlessness. So I think we saw some of that in the summer riots last year, the consequences of social instability, the consequences of a divided society in which some people have been left behind. Now, I'm not saying there was any great coherent social movement behind it, but I think it's the question around last year's civil disturbances was why were we so fragile? Why were we so fertile to that level of social disintegration? If we don't tackle that, it's not just bad for society and for families, it's bad for the economy. That's not a good investment environment. And the third building block is around more engagement. And by engagement, it is about voting, it is about participation in public life, but it's more than that. It's about how do we make the boundaries between everyday life and decision making much more porous. So, you know, one of the questions on the doorstep that we get from people is what are you gonna, you know, like you politicians, as though politicians are a breed apart. Whereas I'm saying, but who's you? I am you. You know, I came into politics just a few years ago because I was dissatisfied with the way it was running. And that's what we need from people. That the long-term change we need is only going to happen when we deepen and broaden the talent pool from which we're drawing our leaders. And that's about not actually, none of these weak categories about party or not party. It's also about people coming from BME backgrounds. It's about people coming from lower socioeconomic group, poor economic backgrounds and get to the table, which has been the thing that's been lacking in the past. And we've pointed our policies, we've flavoured the areas that we're looking at in our that collection of policies towards delivering on those three things. The plan, tackling poverty and inequality, and more engagement.
Okay. I know possibly some of my audience, but definitely some of the people that speak on my channel, they kind of seem to favour you as one of the people that they would like to, you know, become mayor. But what exactly is it in terms of the kind of the inequality basis? Because I think that there's a general feeling amongst them that you would be the person to sort out that problem, maybe because they feel more familiar with you or your face that they maybe seen before, something along those sorts of lines. So actually, rather than just say, okay, somebody from a similar area to me, he's going to sort the problems out for me. In terms of that basis, in terms of poverty, people from different ethnic backgrounds, exactly how do you feel you'll be able to change the structure so that it kind of favours everybody equally?
So let's take the question of the way Bristol works in the first instance. Yeah, we have a history in Bristol of projects and initiatives. Yeah, equal opportunities, whatever we call it, go back to the 80s. They run for a few years, the funding runs out, and nothing has really changed in the way the system works. Yeah. And by the system, I don't just mean Bristol as a city. You know, we reflect a global political economy that over the last 50 years has exacerbated the gap, but not just between rich and poor, but between the super rich and everyone else. We reflect this. So one is, I'd say the mayor can't do everything, but they can do something. And what I think that last point I particularly made about more engagement is part of that. One person can't deliver the type of fundamental change we need, but if people from communities that have been historically marginalised from opportunity begin to take up these positions of decision making, of power, then we start to get the machinery of the place, the way it works, becoming much different. It's one of the reasons I'm so frustrated with some of the anti-politics cynicism that's peddled at the moment. But my argument is, so I came into politics through Operation Black Vote, who was saying, yes, politics is problematic. It hasn't listened to our voices as communities before, and it served the wealthiest the best. But their answer is not to stop there. Their position is, well, what do you do about it? Well, let's get into politics. Let's get into it and change the way it works, because we're not happy with it. And that's the choice we all face. I'm not happy with it, so what do I want to do? Do I step away from it, or do I actually go and begin to take over? And when people just talk anti-politics and peddle the cynicism and stop there, my argument is you're probably disenfranchising the people who most need politics to work for them, people from our communities. Because if you grew up in Easton like I did, on Stapleton Road, I stand much more chance of getting elected than I do of becoming chief exec of Barclays and influencing LIBOR rates so all my friends can get rich. Yeah. So we've got to have some space for an idea that politics is a place that we can take some action. That's why that third pillar around engagement is so important. But I would say, in terms of just the practical things we do in Bristol, we've put a whole list of things that are designed to tackle poverty, designed to tackle inequality. We're pledging, making Bristol a living wage city. A living wage is what it says on the tin. How much do you need to live on with some kind of dignity, rather than minimum wage and scrape by and maybe do 2 jobs, so that a parent doesn't spend any time with their children because they're working just to be able to pay their bills. And by the way, if you work 2 jobs just to pay your bills, it doesn't mean you cease to be poor. It just means you can pay your bills. You still need to do 2 jobs. Building 4,000 homes. You can't have the basis for a productive life and tackling these problems of social immobility unless people have a stable home life where children can feel secure, they can do their homework. And I've spoken to 2 women in the last 3 weeks, both who in a private rented sector were going to be made homeless by their landlords who are hiking their rents. So we're saying we need to protect people in the private rented sector. Both of these women had children. What's going to happen to the lives of these children? Their mental health, their school attainment, tackling the cost of public transport. Again, it locks people out of opportunities, not just to link with each other, but to get to job opportunities, around the city. So that's where our worldview is important, because we can come up with a collection of issues and then do stuff that points in all 10 different directions. We are saying, this is the worldview, these are the issues, and this is how we're going to tackle them, pointing towards these 3 things. Big plan, tackling poverty and inequality, and making sure more people are engaged in decision making.
Okay, so you mentioned the riots that had happened before. That's something that I did actually film, and you also mentioned people basically a certain feeling that there is towards politics. I think the thing that runs through both of those things is transparency, just in terms of the interaction between decision makers, and all of those sorts of things. So, considering that your position isn't the be-all of end-all of anything, considering where you will be, how will you try and improve the transparency in your own decision-making if you did become elected?
Well, one is the inherent offer in the mayoral position, that it becomes visible. So I was in a school assembly today, and I asked the children, do they know who the leader of Bristol City Council is? No hands went up. I asked them if they knew who the leader of London was. About 50% of the hands went up. So actually, one of the things that people talk around as a mayor is that here's the face and here's a line of accountability. And if stuff isn't happening, life isn't better, then you've got someone to hold accountable. And whoever's mayor will know this. So when they're asking for things to be done, they'll be making the demand that it actually happens. The second thing I think around that is about being a mayor that is really proactive in engaging people, not in some kind of condescending way. I'll go out and meet the people and all that, but it has to be natural. What we've spoken about is having question times, kind of village hall meetings, as it were, in different parts of the city throughout the year, but really anchoring those in the diary and making sure that we do those with local councillors, local neighbourhood partnerships and so forth, so that there is an interaction. Working with community media, again, which is critical. And I used to work with community media. I had a show on Ujima back in the day, and how we make sure we make best use of community media, which I'm a fervent believer in. And again, not just the BBC and the Post, but where local people are picking up the stories and raising local issues. So that outreach is actually critical for the mayor. It's also going to be important that we talk about that with the city councillors. I would just say on that too, that it's important to know that the City Council isn't the be-all and end-all in the city. There were many other institutions that shape life here: health service, the police, private sector. And what we need to do is look at the way Bristol works as a whole, to make sure that people are feeling that, and actually not just feeling, because you can create feeling without it having any bearing on reality, but that there is a stronger relationship, civil engagement. The last thing I would say is going back to this engagement thing. We've got to get beyond this position where decision making happens over there and real life for most people happens over here. We have to blur that boundary so that people genuinely are at the decision-making table. Now, that is a responsibility of people in positions of power every time. By definition, they have power, they can influence life more. But actually, it's a responsibility on us too. So I shared with some of my friends, if Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mandela waited for a perfect invitation to the table, it wasn't going to come, and they'd still be waiting. We in our communities have to have the audacity to say, there's some power over there, and we're going to go and sit at the table. And we're going to be part of that conversation, not because we received the perfect invite, but because that's what we need to do for our sakes, for the sakes of our families and our communities, and for the sake of this city.
Okay, so you've mentioned obviously about a kind of a global view, a global position on certain things, and kind of thinking about the larger scale kind of possibilities within Bristol. At a certain stage, there's obviously the possibility that might, not that it might not benefit other places in the UK, but essentially the similar relationship, that the struggles that happen between UK and Brussels, there's a chance for a smaller version of that, where what Bristol wants or what you want to do as Bristol might not be favoured at the top, so to speak. Now, when those sorts of conflicts happen, when those conflicts happen, I mean, is that something that you thought about? Are there ways that you're trying to kind of set a foundation now to minimise that sort of problem? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think there's a big piece of thinking to be done and planning for looking at the way the world is actually developing. And I think it certainly is the case that cities and city regions will be fighting their own corner, irrespective of what their central government does, and irrespective of what happens at Europe level. And so, for example, Austin, Texas has a high-tech sector. It would be within our interest to make a connection with Austin, Texas, because we both have high-tech offers and we have a common interest. Now, we can do that with the help of central government, or we could just do it ourselves. We don't have the central government to be the mediator. Europe doesn't have to be the mediator. So in some sense, city regions around the world are now just competing with each other. So we have to fight our corner, and that's where it's going to be. Now, clearly, there's Bristol's part within the national economy. Bristol is and should continue to be a real boost for the British economy. We can bring jobs, we can bring investment. We can be something that keeps us running over, particularly now because it's a real challenge. Obviously, we're in the middle of recession. So we need to really focus on how we keep our economy going, reaching out to those other city regions around the world, or even other countries where we're going to have a natural partnership, and seeing how we could work with each other. But I think that in some sense is the changing nature of the global economy. That sort of wider discussion, but almost nation states are kind of just one part of the election. You look at the existence of multinational companies, head offices in many different countries, and in some sense beyond their national boundaries in which they may have started. So city regions need to catch up with that game and be aware of it, that this is a way of operating now.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for talking with us, and maybe we'll talk to you post November the 15th.
That'd be nice.